Right, could I one more time ask if you could take your seats so we can move on and remain reasonably on time. This is very much a continuation of the spirit of discussion we've already had, putting right up front many of the critical issues, particularly those which have yet to be resolved and those that are really causing immense challenges still in this political process. And we heard in the last session from Barbara Stocking and Margaret Chan the fact that a new political dynamic is being created because of the issue of human impact as well as just scientific impact. What we're going to do now is discuss nations at risk still. We have 3 represented on the platform, but there are many others, of course, vulnerable nations who have enormous concerns at the moment, as we just saw in that brief video. I'd like to make clear the kind of things which we think need to be discussed in the next hour and a quarter or so, because lunch will be delayed a little bit. What are the multiple stresses now on the vulnerable nations? What are the biggest threats, particularly the direct threats, health, famine, storms and floods, the indirect threats, the social, political, the mass migration, the resource wars? What commonalities have emerged among countries worst affected by climate change, particularly the vulnerable developing countries? What are the time frames we're now talking about? Where will the tipping points be? There have been many predictions and identifications of what would be feared as tipping points. How much closer are we? How much are they identified? How can countries at risk safeguard themselves internationally? And how much are the vulnerable nations missing a trick in not coming together enough to voice their concerns and their cases around the world? Well, let's get reflections from 3 countries which in their own ways are significantly challenged on these issues in ways which all of you know, but I'd like you to address these issues, and I'll pick them up if you don't. First of all, the President of Kiribati, welcome. Secondly, John Kufuor, until this year President of Ghana, and Senator Loren Legarda from the Philippines, who is actively involved in these issues. In fact, was on a BBC debate only last week talking about risk and disasters, which is going to be transmitted next week. Let me ask you all to open the discussion, to be as clear as you can, as dramatic if necessary as you can, Mr. President, how you're seeing these critical issues, particularly of the multiple stresses that your nation faces at the moment, the speed at which things are changing or not, what the tipping points are, and where the biggest threats are, both direct and indirect. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like just simply to express my deep gratitude for Mr. Anand for this invitation and, of course, the Global Humanitarian Forum. I'm very happy to be here because we need to share the experience that we are facing, what our small country is facing. And we need to understand some of the geography of the small island states. And one aspect of our geography is that on average we're about 2 meters above sea level, about so high. And so, the most immediate danger that we are facing in terms of climate change is the rising sea level. The forthcoming science is not very reassuring. The fourth assessment report of the IPCC, together with the more recent scenarios being projected, I think give us very little reason for comfort. And so, what does it mean for us? I think we need to address the short-term issues, adaptation requirements, but I'm afraid that in the long term we are faced with the reality that one, our islands which support our population will become increasingly less able to support the number of population. This will happen over time. It's already happening to some extent, but I think the long-term scenario, according to the projections, is that we would have at some time have to leave our islands. And these are the emotional questions which I think some of the speakers have raised today. We are not talking about numbers. We're not talking about debating this issue for the next 10 years. We're not talking about agreeing on the methodologies. We are talking about what is to be done to our people of 100,000 people, to the people of the Maldives of around 400,000 people, to the people of Tuvalu who similarly face the same fate. These are the issues. We ask ourselves a number of questions. What happens to our cultural identity? Where do we go? Which countries are going to be accepting us? And so these are the realities. The tipping point is how many more years? We thought that we had all of this century to decide what to do. But it appears that the time limit is getting shorter. And perhaps we are talking about within the next 50 years. So I think it makes it all the more imperative. I think the message that the President, Mr. Kofi Annan, delivered this morning is absolutely vital. That action is today. It's not in 10 months' time. I heard the previous panel talking about resolving the methodology within the next 10 months. I think the issue is we know what is going to happen in the next 50 years. We must think in terms of what to do now rather than in 10, 20 years' time. We have a number of packages to address this. We would like to see our people migrate. We have no choice but to do that. But to migrate with dignity and confidence. In order to do that, we need to give them the training, the education, so that they can migrate on merit beginning from today. Existing policies are already in place. We would like them to be able to access those, but we need to prepare them for that. We need partnership from the international community. We need partnership from the countries that we work with. And I think it calls for quite a challenge on how really human we are. Somebody made the joke, I think the director of Oxfam made the joke that, there are polar bears trying to save human beings. But in reality, that is sometimes true. In short, Mr. Moderator, that's not what I like to say. It's a very powerful message. It's come very deeply, and I think somebody raised the question of what happens to the emotional upheaval that these people will feel. What happens to their sovereignty? What happens to their cultural identity? These are the issues that I'm afraid I don't have any answers to. What happens to our exclusive economic zone, which is very extensive? Do somebody else divide it up? Or do we take it with us? Where? These are the questions.
That's another important element of human impact. But let's be clear, has anything changed in terms of the risk or the threat to your nation? Has anything improved?
Over the years, I don't think we have been experiencing changes to our shoreline. We've had whole villages relocated. Even in my short lifetime, that has happened. And we never said this is due to climate change, because we don't know anything. We did not know too much about climate change. But these events are happening, and they continue to happen with more frequency, more severity. And so, yes, indeed, there are changes that we are experiencing. And,
but nothing is improving from your perspective?
Nothing is improving. There is, I think the question that we feel is correct intuitively, but we need to do a thorough evaluation of this, and there is that over the years, in more recent times, we believe there has been a net loss of land mass. And of course, we don't have a lot of land mass to lose.
And quickly, before I move on to President Kufuor, how do you believe your voice is being heard? A nation state, along with the Maldives and others, threatened with essential annihilation. Is that resonating among the major capitals of the developed world and also the major capitals of the leading nations in the developing world?
Well, this is the first opportunity that I've had to speak in Europe. And I hope Europe is listening. But I've had opportunity to speak in Australia, in New Zealand. I was there for World Environment Day. And I think that was the first time that I had the privilege of speaking with Dr. Pachari and, of course, the Kim Steiner from the UNEP.